Jake Morrison stood at the window of his small apartment and looked out at the busy streets of New York City. Tomorrow would change everything for him and for all of humanity. At 35 years old, he had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. The phone call had come 3 weeks ago from General Patricia Hayes at the Space Command headquarters. Earth had finally been accepted for review by the Galactic Federation. Jake had always been different from other people. He could talk to anyone and make them feel comfortable. His teachers in school said he was a natural diplomat. His military instructors said he was born to lead. His psychology professors said he had the perfect balance of emotion and logic that made him ideal for first contact situations. All of these skills had led him to this moment. The Galactic Federation was made up of 12 different alien species. They had been watching Earth for over 50 years. During that time, they had seen humans fight wars, destroy their environment, and cause suffering to their own kind. But they had also seen humans help each other, create beautiful art, and show kindness to strangers. The Federation was not sure if humans were ready to join the galaxy community. Jake would be the one to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. He would live on Unity Prime, the massive space station where all Federation business took place. For 1 full year, every action he took would be watched and judged. If he succeeded, humanity would gain access to technology that could solve all of Earth's problems. If he failed, humanity would be left alone for at least another 100 years. Dr. Lisa Chen had been Jake's trainer for the past 6 months. She was one of Earth's best experts on alien psychology and had studied every piece of information the Federation had shared about their member species. Lisa had taught Jake about the different alien cultures, their languages, and their ways of thinking. Most importantly, she had taught him to always remember that he represented all of humanity. The Zephyrians were the leaders of the Federation. They were tall, thin beings with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. They had evolved beyond violence thousands of years ago and now spent their time studying philosophy and art. The Zephyrians believed that all intelligent species could learn to live in peace if they were given proper guidance. The Valorians were master engineers who could build anything they could imagine. Their technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to human scientists. They had created Unity Prime itself, a crystal structure that floated in space and generated its own gravity and atmosphere. The Valorians were curious about human creativity and wanted to see what humans might invent if given access to their tools. The Kelthani were traders who moved goods and information across the galaxy. They had been the first to suggest that Earth might be ready for Federation membership. The Kelthani believed that humans had something valuable to offer the galaxy, though they would not say what that something was. Jake had memorized everything about all 12 species. He knew their histories, their cultures, and their individual personalities. He had practiced their greeting rituals until he could perform them perfectly. He had learned to speak their languages and understand their jokes. He was as ready as any human could be for this mission. The transport ship arrived at dawn. It was unlike anything humans had ever built. The ship looked like a living thing made of metal and light. When Jake stepped inside, he felt the walls pulse gently around him. The ship's pilot was a Valorian named Kethamor, who spoke perfect English with a musical accent. During the 3-day journey to Unity Prime, Kethamor told Jake about life on the station. There were representatives from all 12 species living and working together. They solved problems, shared knowledge, and made decisions that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. The Federation had not had a war between member species for over 2,000 years. Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. 8 billion humans were counting on him to succeed. Children who dreamed of traveling to other worlds, scientists who wanted to unlock the secrets of the universe, and ordinary people who just wanted a better future for their families. All of their hopes rested on his ability to convince 12 alien species that humanity was ready to join them. When Unity Prime came into view, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The station was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. Its crystal surfaces reflected the light of nearby stars and created patterns of color that shifted and danced across its hull. Smaller ships moved around it like insects around a flower, carrying people and cargo to and from the station's many docking bays. Kethamor guided their ship into one of the bays with gentle precision. As they landed, Jake could see other beings moving around the docking area. Some walked on two legs like humans. Others floated through the air, and still others seemed to flow like liquid across the floor. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Jake picked up his single bag of personal items and followed Kethmore out of the ship. The air on Unity Prime tasted clean and fresh, with a slight metallic tang that reminded him of ozone after a thunderstorm. The gravity felt almost exactly like Earth's, which was no accident. The Federation had adjusted the station's systems to make him comfortable. A group of aliens was waiting to greet him. Jake recognized them from his studies. There was Veltar, the Zephyrian Archon who led the Federation Council. Standing next to him was Moradane, a Valorian engineer who had helped design Unity Prime. Several other species were represented, each wearing the formal robes that indicated their diplomatic status. Jake straightened his shoulders and walked forward to meet them. He performed the traditional Zephyrian greeting, placing his hands together and bowing slightly. Then he switched to the Valorian greeting, touching his forehead and extending his arms. One by one, he greeted each alien according to their customs. Several of them seemed impressed by his preparation. Veltar spoke first, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. He welcomed Jake to Unity Prime and expressed hope that the next year would be beneficial for all involved. The other aliens added their own words of greeting, each speaking in their own language before switching to English for Jake's benefit. As they led him through the station's corridors, Jake marveled at the technology around him. The walls seemed to glow with their own light, and he could see streams of data flowing through transparent tubes. The Federation's mastery over matter and energy was complete. They could create anything they needed and travel anywhere they wanted. Humanity had so much to learn from them. Jake's quarters were larger than his apartment back on Earth. The walls could display any image he wanted, and the furniture could reshape itself to match his preferences. A communication device allowed him to speak with Earth whenever he wanted, though there would be a delay of several hours due to the distance. That night, as Jake lay in his bed and looked out at the stars through his window, he thought about the magnitude of his mission. Tomorrow he would begin the process of proving that humanity deserved a place in the galactic community. He had trained for years for this opportunity, and he was determined not to waste it. The future of his species depended on his success. 3 months had passed since Jake Morrison arrived at Unity Prime, and things had gone better than anyone had expected. He had quickly learned the rhythms of life on the massive space station. Each morning he attended briefings with the Federation Council, where he listened to discussions about trade disputes, territorial boundaries, and scientific discoveries. In the afternoons, he participated in cultural exchange programs, sharing human art, music, and literature with curious aliens who found Earth's creative expressions fascinating. Jake had made friends among several species. Zara, a young Kelthani trader, enjoyed hearing his stories about Earth's different cultures and customs. She was amazed that humans could be so diverse while still being the same species. Thane, a Valorian engineer, was impressed by human problem-solving techniques that used simple tools to achieve complex results. Even Veltar, the stern Zephyrian Archon, had begun to smile when Jake entered the council chambers. The monthly reports sent back to Earth were full of good news. Dr. Lisa Chen received detailed updates about Jake's progress, and she shared them with world leaders who were eager to hear about humanity's future among the stars. The general mood on Earth was optimistic. People began to believe that their long isolation was finally coming to an end. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning, when Veltar approached Jake with an unusual request. The Archon's glowing eyes seemed brighter than usual, and his normally calm voice carried a note of excitement. The Federation Council had decided to honor Jake with a privilege that had never been granted to a representative from a probationary species. They wanted to give him access to the archive of Transcendence. Jake had heard whispers about the archive during his 3 months on Unity Prime. It was supposedly a vast collection of knowledge that contained the recorded wisdom of thousands of civilizations. The archive existed in a special dimension that could only be reached through advanced neural interface technology. Most Federation citizens never gained access to it, and even senior diplomats had to wait years before being granted permission to enter. The fact that they were offering this honor to Jake after only 3 months was unprecedented. Veltar explained that the council had been so impressed with his progress that they wanted to accelerate his education. The archive would allow Jake to understand the true scope of galactic civilization and prepare him to be an effective advocate for humanity's full membership in the Federation. Jake felt honored and excited. This was exactly the kind of breakthrough he had hoped for. Access to the archive would give him knowledge that could benefit all of humanity. He could learn about technologies that might solve Earth's environmental problems, medical techniques that could cure diseases, and philosophical insights that could help humans become better beings. The preparation for archive access took several days. Jake had to undergo medical procedures that would allow the neural interface to connect safely with his human brain. The Federation's doctors were fascinated by human neural structure, which was more complex than they had expected. Dr. Emma Blake, a Zephyrian specialist in interspecies psychology, monitored Jake's progress and assured him that the process was completely safe. When the day finally arrived, Jake was led to a chamber deep within Unity Prime that he had never seen before. The room was perfectly spherical and lined with a material that seemed to absorb light. In the center was a chair that looked more like a work of art than a piece of technology. Thin cables connected to nodes that would attach to Jake's head and spine. Emma Blake explained the process one more time. Jake's consciousness would be temporarily transferred into the archive's data space, while his body remained safely in the chair. He would be able to access information by simply thinking about what he wanted to learn. The experience would feel completely real, even though it was taking place in a digital environment. She warned him that the amount of information available might be overwhelming at first, but that he would quickly adapt. Jake settled into the chair and felt the neural nodes attach themselves to his head. There was a moment of disorientation, and then suddenly he was standing in a vast library that stretched beyond the horizon in all directions. Shelves rose impossibly high above him, filled with books, data crystals, and storage devices from civilizations across the galaxy. The air hummed with the presence of incredible knowledge waiting to be discovered. At first, Jake explored carefully. He accessed basic information about Federation history, learning how the 12 species had first met and decided to work together. He studied their technologies and marveled at scientific discoveries that humans had not even dreamed of. The experience was intoxicating. He felt like he was drinking from the fountain of all knowledge. But as Jake delved deeper into the archive, he began to find information that the Federation had not mentioned during his briefings. He discovered that all 12 member species had once been violent and aggressive, much like humanity. The difference was that they had all undergone something called the Great Purification, a process that had eliminated their capacity for violence and aggression. Jake learned that the Great Purification was not a natural evolutionary development. It was a deliberate program of genetic and psychological conditioning that had been imposed on each species when they joined the Federation. The process removed their ability to feel anger, hatred, or the desire for conflict. It made them peaceful, but it also made them fundamentally different from what they had once been. More disturbing information followed. Jake discovered that the Federation did not simply wait for species to evolve naturally toward peace. They actively intervened in the development of younger civilizations, subtly guiding them away from violence and toward pacification. Wars were prevented through careful manipulation of political leaders. Aggressive individuals were removed from positions of power through accidents or mysterious illnesses. Military technologies failed at critical moments due to sabotage that was never detected. As Jake absorbed this information, a cold feeling began to grow in his stomach. He started to search for records about Earth, hoping to find evidence that humanity had been left to develop naturally. What he found instead made his blood run cold. The Federation had been manipulating human development for decades. The sudden end of the Cold War had not been due to political changes or economic pressures. It had been the result of Federation interference that had prevented nuclear conflict. Several world leaders who had been planning aggressive military actions had died in convenient accidents. The failure of certain weapon systems during critical conflicts had been caused by sabotage, not technical problems. Even more shocking was the discovery that humanity had actually achieved interstellar flight much earlier than the official records showed. A secret human colony had been established on a nearby star system 30 years ago. But the colony had been destroyed by Federation forces to prevent what they called premature expansion. Thousands of human pioneers had been murdered, and all evidence of their existence had been erased from Earth's records. Jake felt a rage building inside him unlike anything he had ever experienced. The Federation that he had worked so hard to impress, the aliens that he had considered friends, had been lying to him from the moment he arrived. They had been manipulating humanity for decades, controlling their development like farmers managing livestock. The worst part was realizing that his own mission was part of the deception. The Federation had no intention of accepting humanity as equal partners. They planned to put humans through the same great purification process that had been inflicted on all the other species. Jake was not here to prove that humanity was ready to join the galactic community. He was here to be studied and evaluated before his entire species was stripped of everything that made them human. Jake spent hours in the archive, searching for more information and trying to understand the full scope of the Federation's deception. He learned about the technologies they used to control other species, the techniques they employed to reshape entire civilizations, and the casual way they discussed the elimination of billions of individuals who did not fit their vision of galactic peace. When Jake finally disconnected from the archive and returned to his body, he found Emma Blake waiting anxiously beside his chair. She asked how the experience had been and whether he had found the information useful. Jake looked into her glowing eyes and realized that she probably had no idea about the true history hidden in the archive's depths. The Great Purification had made it impossible for her to understand concepts like deception, manipulation, or genocide. Jake smiled and told Emma that the experience had been educational beyond his wildest dreams. He thanked her for the opportunity and said he looked forward to sharing what he had learned with the Council. Emma seemed pleased with his response and escorted him back to his quarters. Alone in his room, Jake sat on his bed and stared out at the stars. Everything had changed. The naive diplomat who had arrived 3 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood the true nature of the beings he was dealing with. The Federation wanted to judge whether humanity was ready to join their community, but they had no right to make that judgment. They were the ones who had been manipulating and controlling human development from the shadows. 2 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison's experience in the Archive of Transcendence, and the change in him was subtle but growing stronger each day. To the Federation representatives on Unity Prime, he appeared to be the same friendly and eager human diplomat they had come to know. He still attended council meetings, participated in cultural exchanges, and asked thoughtful questions about galactic civilization. But underneath the surface, something dark was taking shape. Jake had learned to hide his thoughts using techniques he had discovered in the archive's deepest sections. The Federation's monitoring systems were designed to detect physical threats and obvious signs of mental distress, but they were not equipped to recognize the careful psychological transformation that Jake was undergoing. His new knowledge had given him tools that the Federation did not even realize existed. Every night, Jake returned to the archive through the neural interface. Emma Blake had been pleased with his enthusiasm for learning and had given him unlimited access to the vast repository of information. She believed that his deep study of Federation history and culture would make him a better advocate for humanity's integration into galactic society. She had no idea that Jake was using this access to explore sections of the archive that even most Federation members were not allowed to see. Jake learned about weapons that could destroy entire star systems with a single shot. He studied biotechnology that could rewrite the genetic code of any living being in a matter of hours. He discovered techniques for psychological manipulation that could turn an entire population into willing slaves without them ever realizing what had happened. Most importantly, he learned about the secret weaknesses of every Federation species. The Zephyrians, for all their advanced philosophy and peaceful nature, had a fatal vulnerability in their neural structure. The great purification process that had eliminated their capacity for violence had also made them completely unable to defend themselves against certain types of psychic attacks. A properly trained human could potentially control an entire group of Zephyrians without them even being aware of it. The Valorians, despite their mastery of technology, had become so dependent on their automated systems that they had lost the ability to think creatively when those systems failed. Their great engineering works were impressive, but they were also predictable. A human who understood their patterns could potentially sabotage their technology in ways that they would never think to look for. The Kelthani were traders and information brokers, but their entire culture was built on trust and mutual cooperation. They had no defenses against deception because they had been conditioned to believe that all Federation members were incapable of lying. A skilled manipulator could potentially gain access to their entire network of contacts and resources. Jake studied each species in turn, learning their histories, their cultures, and most importantly, their weaknesses. The Federation's arrogance had made them careless. They had shared their knowledge freely with him because they could not imagine that a primitive human could use it against them. They had created the perfect enemy and then invited him into their most secure facility. As Jake's knowledge grew, so did his anger. Every friendly conversation with Veltar reminded him of the thousands of humans who had been murdered to prevent Earth's expansion into space. Every technical discussion with Thane made him think about the wars that had been manipulated and the leaders who had been assassinated. Every trade story from Zara brought back memories of the secret interventions that had shaped human history without humanity's knowledge or consent. Jake began to notice things about Unity Prime that he had not seen before. The station's defensive systems were incredibly advanced, but they were designed to protect against external threats. The Federation had never needed to worry about internal security because all of their member species had been conditioned to be incapable of violence. The station's most critical systems were protected by passwords and access codes that Jake was slowly learning through his diplomatic privileges. More importantly, Jake realized that Unity Prime was not just a diplomatic station. It was the control center for the Federation's entire network of surveillance and manipulation. From this single location, they monitored hundreds of developing civilizations and coordinated the subtle interventions that guided those species toward pacification. The station contained detailed files on every world in their sphere of influence, including complete psychological profiles of their leaders and strategic plans for future manipulation. Jake started to form a plan that would have horrified his former self. The Federation wanted to evaluate humanity's readiness to join galactic civilization, but they had made a fundamental error in their assessment. They had assumed that humans were like every other species they had encountered, beings who could be studied, understood, and ultimately controlled. They had not considered the possibility that humans might be fundamentally different, in ways that made them immune to the Federation's standard techniques. The Federation's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their perfect peace and cooperation had made them predictable and vulnerable. They could not conceive of genuine deception because they had been conditioned to believe that all intelligent beings would eventually embrace their philosophy of nonviolence. They had eliminated war from their society, but they had also eliminated their ability to recognize when war was being brought to them. Jake began to use his diplomatic status to gain access to Unity Prime's critical systems. He volunteered to help with routine maintenance tasks, expressing interest in learning how Federation technology worked. His eager questions and obvious intelligence impressed the station's technical staff, who were happy to explain their procedures to such an enthusiastic student. They had no reason to suspect that Jake was actually planting dormant viruses and creating hidden access points throughout their systems. The process took weeks of careful work. Jake had to be subtle in his approach, creating backdoors that would remain undetected until he was ready to use them. He studied the station's security protocols and learned how to circumvent them without triggering any alarms. The Federation's trust in their own invulnerability worked in his favor, making them careless about protecting systems that they believed could never be threatened. Jake also began to gather intelligence about the Federation's military capabilities. Despite their peaceful nature, they maintained a substantial fleet of ships for exploration and emergency response. These vessels were equipped with weapons that could level continents and defensive systems that could withstand attacks from entire armadas. But like everything else about the Federation, their military was designed to deal with external threats and conventional warfare. They had no protocols for dealing with an enemy who was already inside their most secure facility. As Jake's preparations continued, he maintained his facade of cooperation and enthusiasm. He attended diplomatic functions and smiled at alien jokes. He participated in cultural exchanges and shared stories about human art and literature. He asked innocent questions about Federation history and technology, always maintaining the image of a primitive human who was eager to learn from his advanced alien mentors. Emma Blake continued to monitor Jake's psychological state, but she found nothing alarming in his behavior. His requests for additional archive access seemed to come from genuine intellectual curiosity. His questions about Federation capabilities appeared to be motivated by a desire to understand what humanity might contribute to galactic civilization. His friendly interactions with other species demonstrated exactly the kind of social adaptation that the Federation wanted to see. Jake had learned to present different faces to different audiences. With Veltar, he discussed philosophy and ethics, always expressing admiration for Zephyrian wisdom. With Thane, he talked about engineering and problem-solving, showing excitement about human creativity being enhanced by Valorian technology. With Zara, he shared stories about Earth's diverse cultures and trading traditions, demonstrating humanity's potential value as Federation partners. But alone in his quarters at night, Jake's true thoughts were very different. He thought about the human colonist who had been murdered for the crime of wanting to explore the galaxy. He thought about the wars that had been manipulated and the conflicts that had been prolonged to serve Federation interests. He thought about the future that awaited humanity if they were accepted into the Federation and subjected to the Great Purification. The Federation believed that peace could only be achieved through the elimination of aggressive instincts. They thought that violence was a disease that needed to be cured. But Jake was beginning to understand that humanity's capacity for violence was not a flaw to be corrected. It was a tool that could be used to protect everything that made humans unique and valuable. The Federation had spent thousands of years creating a galaxy where conflict was impossible and war was unthinkable. They had built a perfect prison and convinced themselves that it was paradise. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had invited humanity to join them before ensuring that humans could be controlled. Jake's transformation was nearly complete. The naive diplomat who had arrived at Unity Prime 6 months ago was gone. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison first set foot on Unity Prime, and today would mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Federation Council had decided to hold a special ceremony to celebrate the anniversary of their founding, and representatives from all 12 member species had gathered in the station's Grand Assembly Hall. It was supposed to be a day of reflection on the peace and prosperity that their alliance had brought to the galaxy. Jake had been invited to speak at the ceremony, an honor that reflected the Federation's growing confidence in humanity's potential for membership. Veltar had personally requested that Jake share his thoughts on what the Federation meant to developing civilizations like humanity. The Archon believed that Jake's perspective would provide valuable insights for future first contact situations. Jake stood before the mirror in his quarters and adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform. The face looking back at him was still recognizably human, but the eyes held a coldness that had not been there 6 months ago. He had learned to hide his true thoughts behind a mask of polite enthusiasm, but today that mask would finally come off. The Federation was about to see exactly what kind of creature they had invited into their perfect society. The assembly hall was a marvel of Federation engineering, a vast circular chamber with crystalline walls that showed images of the 12 member worlds. Representatives from each species sat in their designated sections, wearing the formal robes that indicated their diplomatic status. The atmosphere was festive and peaceful, exactly what one would expect from a civilization that had not known war for thousands of years. Jake took his place at the speaker's podium and looked out at the assembled aliens. He saw Veltar in the front row, his glowing eyes bright with anticipation. Emma Blake sat nearby, her expression showing pride in the human diplomat she had helped to train. Thane was there with a group of Valorian engineers, and Zara sat with the Kelthany trading delegation. All of them were expecting to hear words of gratitude and friendship from humanity's representative. Jake began his speech in the traditional manner, thanking the Federation for their hospitality and expressing appreciation for the honor of addressing such a distinguished gathering. His words were smooth and diplomatic, exactly what his audience expected to hear. But as he continued speaking, subtle changes began to creep into his tone. Jake started to talk about the importance of truth in diplomatic relations. He spoke about the value of honesty between species and the need for trust in any successful alliance. The assembled aliens nodded in agreement, not yet realizing that Jake was preparing to shatter their comfortable assumptions about the nature of their relationship with humanity. Then Jake changed direction completely. His voice became harder, and his words more direct as he began to reveal what he had learned during his months of study in the Archive of Transcendence. He told them about the Great Purification and how it had been used to strip away the natural instincts of every Federation member species. He described the systematic manipulation of developing civilizations and the casual elimination of those who did not conform to Federation standards. The reaction was immediate, but confused. Many of the aliens looked puzzled, as if they could not understand why Jake was discussing ancient history that had no relevance to the present celebration. Others seemed disturbed by his harsh tone, but could not quite grasp why his words felt threatening. The Great Purification had made it difficult for them to recognize criticism or hostility when it was directed at them. Jake continued his revelation, providing specific examples of Federation interference in human development. He told them about the secret colony that had been destroyed and the thousands of humans who had been murdered to maintain the illusion of Earth's technological limitations. He described the wars that had been manipulated and the leaders who had been assassinated to prevent humanity from developing along natural lines. Veltar finally stood up and attempted to interrupt Jake's speech. The Archon's voice carried its usual musical quality, but there was a note of confusion that had not been there before. Veltar tried to explain that the Federation's actions had been necessary for the greater good of galactic civilization. He spoke about the dangers of allowing violent species to develop without guidance and the benefits that peaceful integration had brought to all member races. Jake listened to Veltar's explanation with a cold smile. Then he asked a simple question that sent shockwaves through the assembly hall. He wanted to know what gave the Federation the right to make decisions about the development of other species, what made them qualified to judge which civilizations deserved to survive and which needed to be eliminated or transformed. The question was so alien to Federation, thinking that many of the assembled representatives could not even process it properly. They had been conditioned for so long to accept the righteousness of their mission that they had lost the ability to question their own assumptions. The concept that their actions might be wrong or immoral was literally beyond their comprehension. Jake pressed his advantage, asking more questions that the Federation could not answer. He wanted to know how many species had been destroyed because they refused to submit to the Great Purification. He asked about the civilizations that had been wiped out to prevent competition with Federation interests. He demanded to know what gave them the authority to reshape entire galaxies according to their vision of perfect peace. The assembled aliens began to show signs of distress. Their conditioning had not prepared them to deal with direct challenges to their fundamental beliefs. Some tried to leave the assembly hall, but Jake was not finished with them yet. With a gesture that activated hidden programs he had planted throughout Unity Prime systems, he sealed the doors and took control of the station's communication arrays. The Federation representatives found themselves trapped in the assembly hall with nowhere to run. For the first time in thousands of years, they were face to face with someone who was not afraid of them and did not accept their authority. Jake's transformation was complete, and the mask of diplomatic courtesy had been permanently discarded. Jake told them that humanity would not be joining the Federation as a junior member to be guided and controlled. Instead, the Federation would be joining humanity as subjects to be ruled and reshaped according to human values. The galaxy's age of peaceful stagnation was coming to an end, and a new era of human dominance was about to begin. The aliens initially tried to dismiss Jake's threats as the delusional fantasies of a primitive mind that had been overwhelmed by exposure to advanced knowledge, but their amusement died when Jake demonstrated his control over Unity Prime systems by using the station's defensive arrays to obliterate an uninhabited moon in a nearby system. The explosion was visible through the assembly hall's crystal walls, a bright flash that lit up the faces of terrified alien diplomats. Jake explained that he had spent months studying Federation technology and learning how to turn their own systems against them. The weapons that protected Unity Prime could just as easily be used to destroy Federation worlds. The communication networks that connected their civilization could be used to spread chaos and confusion. The very technology that had made their peaceful society possible would become the instrument of their destruction. Veltar tried one last time to reason with Jake, appealing to the human concepts of mercy and justice that he had studied during their months of interaction. But Jake's response was chilling in its simplicity. The Federation had shown no mercy to the humans who had been murdered for wanting to explore the galaxy. They had demonstrated no justice when they manipulated human development for their own convenience. Why should humanity show them considerations that they had never extended to others? Jake issued his ultimatum to the terrified Federation representatives. They had one standard year to surrender control of their territories and technology to humanity. Any species that submitted willingly would be allowed to continue existing under human rule. Those that resisted would be systematically destroyed, starting with their homeworlds and ending with the complete extinction of their people. The assembled aliens could not believe what they were hearing. One primitive human could not possibly challenge an alliance of 12 advanced species with thousands of years of technological development. But Jake had anticipated their disbelief, and he was prepared to demonstrate exactly how wrong they were about humanity's capabilities. Jake activated another hidden program, and the assembly hall's displays began showing real-time images of human warships entering Federation space. The vessels had been retrofitted with stolen Federation technology and were crewed by humans who had been secretly trained for this moment. The ships moved with a speed and precision that the Federation's own vessels could not match, striking at carefully selected targets before disappearing back into the void. The first target was a Zephyrian research station that had been studying ways to accelerate the Great Purification process. The station was destroyed in seconds. Its peaceful researchers vaporized before they could even comprehend what was happening. The second target was a Valorian manufacturing facility that produced the neural interface technology used to control developing species. The war that followed Jake Morrison's declaration lasted exactly 97 days, and it changed the galaxy forever. The Federation's response to his ultimatum had been predictable in its confusion and ineffectiveness. They tried to negotiate, then attempted to isolate Unity Prime, and finally made desperate efforts to contact other human leaders on Earth who might be more reasonable than their transformed envoy. All of their efforts failed because they fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. Jake had become something beyond their comprehension. He was no longer the idealistic diplomat who had arrived at Unity Prime, hoping to secure humanity's place among the stars. The knowledge he had gained from the archive of transcendence had transformed him into a strategic genius who could think in ways that the pacified Federation species could not match. Every move they made played into his hands, and every attempt at resistance only hastened their inevitable defeat. The first Federation world to fall was Zephyros Prime, the beautiful homeworld of the species that led the Galactic Alliance. Jake had chosen this target carefully, knowing that its destruction would break the spirit of the other Federation members. The Zephyrians had been the architects of the Great Purification, and their philosophy of enforced peace had shaped the entire galactic order. If they could be defeated, the rest of the Federation would collapse like a house of cards. The attack came without warning in the middle of the night. Human warships equipped with Federation technology materialized in orbit around Zephyros Prime and began systematically destroying every military installation and government facility on the planet. The Zephyrians had no effective defenses because their conditioning made it impossible for them to think like warriors. They could not anticipate human tactics or respond to human aggression because such concepts were alien to their purified minds. Jake personally led the assault on the planetary capital where Veltar and the other Zephyrian leaders had taken refuge. The human soldiers who followed him into battle had been carefully selected for their psychological profiles. These were men and women who had been deemed too aggressive for normal society, individuals who had been channeled into military service because they could not function in peaceful civilian roles. The Federation's worst fears about human nature were embodied in these warriors who moved through Zephyrian cities like wolves among sheep. The capture of Veltar marked the effective end of Federation resistance. The Archon, who had once spoken so eloquently about the benefits of peace and cooperation, now knelt before Jake Morrison in chains made from his own people's technology. Jake offered him a choice that was no choice at all: surrender the Federation's authority to humanity or watch his entire species be eliminated. Veltar chose survival, and his formal submission was broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to other species. Jake established his new capital in the ruins of the Federation Council chambers on Unity Prime. The crystal walls that had once displayed images of peaceful member worlds now showed the progress of human conquest across the galaxy. Species after species fell to human forces, their advanced technology useless against an enemy that fought without honor or restraint. The humans did not simply defeat their opponents. They studied them, learned their weaknesses, and then turned their own people against them. The Valorians, despite their mastery of engineering, could not compete with human creativity and adaptability. Jake's forces captured their manufacturing facilities and forced Valorian workers to build weapons designed by human minds. The resulting devices were crude by Federation standards, but devastatingly effective because they incorporated principles that no pacified species would ever consider. Weapons that could cause pain without causing death, devices that could drive entire populations insane, tools of conquest that exploited the psychological vulnerabilities created by the Great Purification. The Kelthani trading networks became instruments of human expansion. Jake did not destroy their commercial infrastructure. Instead, he took control of it and used it to spread human influence throughout the galaxy. Kelthani traders who had once carried goods and information now carried human propaganda and human threats. Their vast network of contacts became a surveillance system that allowed Jake to monitor every corner of his growing empire. Other species tried to negotiate, offering tribute and promises of cooperation in exchange for mercy. Jake accepted their submissions, but on terms that were far harsher than anything the Federation had ever imposed. The aliens who had once condemned humanity's violent nature now found themselves subject to human rules that made their previous existence seem like paradise by comparison. Jake's transformation was complete, and the man who had once dreamed of peaceful cooperation between species was gone forever. He ruled his expanding empire with an iron fist, making decisions that affected billions of lives without consulting anyone else. The human forces that carried out his orders were fanatically loyal, not because they loved him, but because they feared what would happen if they disappointed him. The psychological techniques that Jake had learned from the archive proved to be even more effective than traditional weapons. He could turn entire populations against their own leaders by exploiting the vulnerabilities created by generations of genetic and psychological conditioning. Species that had been peaceful for thousands of years suddenly found themselves capable of violence when the right buttons were pushed. The Great Purification had not eliminated their capacity for aggression. It had simply buried it beneath layers of conditioning that Jake knew how to strip away. Earth itself was transformed by the news of Jake's victories. The revelation that humanity had been manipulated and controlled by the Federation for decades created a wave of anger that swept across the planet. Political leaders who had once preached about the benefits of joining galactic civilization now spoke about the need to support their species in its struggle for independence. Military recruitment reached record levels as young humans volunteered to join Jake's forces and participate in the conquest of the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Chen, who had trained Jake for his diplomatic mission, tried to contact him through quantum communication arrays. She begged him to remember his original purpose and to consider the long-term consequences of his actions. Jake's response was broadcast publicly on Earth, and it chilled everyone who heard it. He told Lisa that he was doing exactly what he had been sent to do, ensuring humanity's place in the galaxy. The method had simply proven to be more efficient than anyone had anticipated. The Federation's attempts at resistance became increasingly desperate as their territory shrank and their options disappeared. Some species tried to flee to distant galaxies, but Jake's forces pursued them relentlessly. Others attempted to develop new weapons that might be effective against human tactics, but their pacified minds could not conceive of the brutal efficiency that characterized human warfare. A few Federation loyalists tried to assassinate Jake, believing that his death might somehow restore the old order. But Jake had anticipated such attempts and surrounded himself with security measures that made him virtually untouchable. More importantly, he had created a command structure that could function without him. His death would not stop the human expansion. It would only make it more savage and uncontrolled. The final battle of the war took place in the Nexus system, where the Federation had established their last stronghold. The combined fleets of 7 species made their final stand against the human armada that Jake had assembled. The battle lasted for 3 days and ended with the complete destruction of Federation forces. The survivors were given a choice: submit to human rule or face extinction. Most chose submission. Jake stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched as the last Federation battlecruiser exploded in a ball of fire. The galaxy was now his, and humanity had taken its place as the dominant species among the stars. But the cost of victory had been enormous, and Jake was no longer recognizable as the man who had left Earth with such hope and idealism. The Federation's dream of peaceful galactic civilization was dead, replaced by a human empire built on conquest and domination. Jake had proven that humanity was indeed ready to join the galactic community, but not as the junior partners that the Federation had envisioned. They had created their own worst nightmare by giving humanity's Envoy the tools and knowledge he needed to destroy them. In the end, the Federation's greatest failure had been their inability to understand that some species could not be controlled or pacified. They had encountered humanity at the worst possible moment, when their representative was capable of learning their secrets, but had not yet been subjected to their conditioning. Jake Morrison had become the instrument of their destruction, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The age of enforced peace was over, and the age of human dominance had begun. Jake had given the Federation exactly what they had asked for, a demonstration of humanity's true nature. Unfortunately for them, that nature had proven to be far more dangerous than they had ever imagined possible.